There we go. All right, welcome everybody. We are starting the first night of the New Testament in its historical settings. So today is August 20th, and then we're going to meet again September 10th, 17th, and 23rd. And with that, I will turn it over to Travis to take it away.
Greetings, everybody. Good to have you here with us. We're going to stay with 4 classes. I won't push out to a 5th one this time. But we're dealing with a much shorter time frame this time. With the New Testament, we're basically talking about the writings that occur from somewhere around 40, 45 to somewhere around 100. So much shorter time frame than what we had to deal with in the Hebrew Bible, but still there was a whole lot going on during this time. Well, in our first session tonight, I'm going to deal specifically with the political environment, because when you're talking about the Hebrew Bible, you're talking about not just the Egyptians or the Sumerians or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or Neo-Babylonians or Persians. You're talking about here one empire, the Roman Empire. So there is so much in the Roman Empire's history that contributes to not only the imagery that we find in the New Testament, but also sometimes it appears theology is affected by it. So in this first session, we're going to deal strictly with Rome, and then in sessions 2, 3, and 4, we're going to talk about the Gospels. But even before the Gospels comes Paul's writings, and we may get a chance to mention some of the other writings that were occurring. So, remember in our last class, we were talking about that Rome had been founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus. That's the legendary beginnings of the city of Rome. They were believed to be twin sons of the Roman god of war, Mars. Now, again, that's their legend that they're sticking with, and they're not going to vary too far from that. Because, you know, when you're talking about people and their religion and their where it places them in the environment, it's a big deal. It's a big deal that the Jews believe that they are the chosen people of God. That one theme manifests itself over and over again among the Jewish people throughout history that made them willing to try anything. It made them wanting to reach out and to spread their culture, spread their religion, spread their economics, their creativity in the arts. With the Romans, especially choosing Mars, the god of war, that's also a big deal. So they felt that conquest and warfare was their divine right, so to speak. Now, Romulus and Remus, we talked about them, the twin sons, and if we'll look at image 1, Pastor, those two were believed to be left in the wilderness, and they were raised by a she-wolf. And this sculpture right here shows that image. That was one of the sacred sculptures of Rome, where the two of them, Romulus and Remus, and we don't know which one is which, but still, that they were actually nursing from the she-wolf. And of course, being wolves, or raised among wolves, I should say, then that contributes also to this pack mentality and this aggressive mentality. At least the way they viewed wolves in those days. Now we have a little bit better understanding about how wolves really operate. Still, so they were rescued by this she-wolf, grew then with among the wolves, and they were floated down a basket down the Tiber River where they had been found by this wolf. They landed near Alba Longa. We talked about that colony that had been established, again, legendarily by Aeneas, who had escaped the sack of Troy long time before. Now, after the two of them are growing up and the two of them are founding a city, Romulus kills his brother Remus to become the first king of Rome. And obviously Rome is named after Romulus. There was a line of the Sabine, the Latin, and the Etruscan kings that followed after Romulus in kind of a non-hereditary succession. There are 7 legendary kings of Rome. There was Romulus, there was Numa Pompilius, there was Tullus Hostilius, good name, Ancus Martius, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, Tarquin the Elder, they were called, Servius Tullius, and then finally Tarquinius Superbus. We mentioned him, Tarquin the Proud. He ruled for about 24 years, from 534 to 510 BC. Now, while they were referred to as Rex in Latin, all the kings after Romulus were actually elected by the Roman Senate. The Roman Senate was the first legislative body in Rome, and while they will add the assembly of the tribes and all like that, the Senate will always be representative of the people of Rome and representative of the power of Rome. Like I said, a lot of times you'll see, and I forgot to get the image, you'll see the image of the 12 rods bound together with an axe head through them that says SPQR across there, which stands for Senatus Populoque Romanum, the Senate and people of Rome. That was always believed. The Senate acted as the executive power, and the people elected their senators. Now, Rome's monarchical period ended with Tarquin the Proud, Tarquinius Superbus, in 509 BC. They had overthrown the last king, and he has been portrayed by ancient historians as being cruel and tyrannical, as opposed to the more benevolent predecessors who came before him. A popular uprising was said to have arisen over his debauching a virtuous noblewoman named Lucretia by the king's son. So whatever the cause was, the people turned then away from a monarchy into a republic, a word that was derived from res publica, which means the property of the people. So this res publica, this republic, is the power bestowed by the people. Rome was built on 7 hills, and so it's known as the city of 7 hills, or the 7 hills of Rome. There was the Esquiline Hill, the Palatine Hill, the Aventine, the Capitoline, the Quirinal Hill, the Viminal Hill, and the Caelian Hill. Those were very strategic, and it also gave the Roman defenses kind of a advantage in seeing the land that surrounded them. So the power of the king now has passed to 2 annually elected magistrates that they call consuls. These consuls, and now the word consul that we use is generally applied to like a foreign, not an ambassador, that's the big guy, but a consul will not serve in a, what do you call that? Anyway, won't serve in the one that's located in the capital. Like, for example, there will be embassy. That was the word I was looking for. There will be an embassy in Berlin, but there will be consulates in places like Freiburg and Hamburg and down in Munich. So these consuls are, in present day, are more like second line of diplomatic authority. For the Romans, though, these consuls were the 2 executives. They were, though they were elected by the people, they were drawn from the Senate. So in order to be a consul, you have to be a senator first. And the Senate was dominated by the patricians. There's two groups, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians are the descendants of the original senators from the time of Romulus. Politics in the early republic was kind of marked by a long struggle between the patricians and the common people, the plebeians, who eventually gained some political power through years of concessions from the patricians. And the plebeians would always be represented by powerful figures who stood for their defense. Julius Caesar comes to mind, and they would always use their political skill to gain more authority, or at least pull authority from the patricians in favor of the more common folks. And then they would actually wind up having their own political bodies like the assembly, and they would have political positions like the tribunes. And it's from the tribunes that they exercise this power that in Latin meant I refuse, which means that if a law has been proposed by the Senate, that if the tribunes of the assembly could see that this was not beneficial to the common folks in Rome, they could simply say, I refuse. That Latin word for I refuse is veto. So these days, when we talk about a presidential veto, it comes from way back the Roman times when the tribune could refuse a law based on its inappropriateness or oppression of the younger folks or the poorer folks, I mean. Now, during the early republic, the Roman Empire begins to grow, the Roman state, not an empire yet. The Roman state begins to grow exponentially in both size and power. The Gauls were those who were living mostly in what today we would call France. The Romans called it Gaul. Though the Gauls actually sacked and burned Rome in 390 BC, the Romans rebounded under the leadership of the military hero Camillus, who eventually gained control of the entire Italian peninsula by the year 264. But in 264, a whole new set of trouble comes. Pastor, if you'll do image 2, and that new threat is going to last for almost 120 years, 118 years, and that is Carthage. Rome then fought this series of war known as the Punic Wars with the city of Carthage. Carthage, you can see there on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in North Africa, that Carthage then began to spread its influence into Spain, into Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and they were all along the Mediterranean coast on the north coast of Africa. The first two Punic Wars ended with Rome in full control of Sicily and also the Western Mediterranean, including much of Spain. In the last Punic War, and there was a Roman senator named Cato the Elder, who always used to end with his speeches with Carthage must be destroyed. Now, Carthage was abiding by the treaty, but Cato the Elder and others were pushing for this final destruction of Carthage because they always viewed Carthage, which was a trading and naval power. Remember, Carthage had been a colony established by the Phoenician city-states. Cato and others of the warmongers were pushing for a final destruction of Carthage. In the Second Punic War, the great hero Hannibal had led actually an invasion of Italy itself and had, according to legend, had thrown a spear over the city walls of Rome, letting everybody know that I'm out here. Now, there was no way that his army was going to be able to reduce the city because of the walls around the city and all like that. So he continued to ravage the Italian countryside. And in the great battle at Cannae, it was one of the classic battles of all time, where his troops, who were so disciplined, began to collapse in at their center, and the Romans were thinking that they were giving way, and they pushed in hard on the center. But what it wound up having was like a V shape, where the Romans were trapped in between two wings of the Carthaginian army. Now, he also had the Numidian cavalry, which was very famous for their horsemanship, and the cavalry then cut off the Romans from any kind of escape. It was a complete catastrophe for the Romans. Now, the Romans know, we got to get out of here. So they actually launched an attack on Carthage, which caused the Carthaginian government to recall Hannibal to come back and defend Carthage. At the Battle of Zama, the Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal because in the middle of the battle, Hannibal's mercenaries decided they hadn't been paid on time and they bailed out. Never trust a mercenary. Now, so by the end of the Third Punic War, you can see all that orange there, which is Carthage itself, as well as most of Spain, far up in the north, that's known as Cisalpine Gaul, where the Po River is located, but also down into Macedonia and Greece. The Romans had taken all that. So the Romans captured and destroyed the city of Carthage. They said that not one stone was left on top of another. They sowed the fields with salt so that no crops would ever grow there again. The Romans then took the survivors and sold them into slavery, and then they made that northern province, or that northern, section of Africa, that became a Roman province then. At the same time, Rome is also fighting against King Philip V of Macedonia. If you look at image 3, Pastor, which is just shows this was all taking part at the same time as the Punic Wars. We have the wars, the Macedonian Wars, as they were called, and that light purple. You see, the dark purple is where the Romans had captured that from the Second Punic War. By the end of the Third Punic War, just before it's called the Second Macedonian War, that light purple spot there, Macedonia, is what gets seized by the Romans. They will then, in yet another series of war, capture Epirus, Thessaly, the Aetolian League. They'll capture everything there on the Greek peninsula, including Crete will wind up getting grabbed up too. So the Romans, now being the sons of Mars, as they think they are seeing it as their destiny to conquer all of the Mediterranean. That was Philip V, who had finally lost Macedonia and all the Greek city-states. And they, again, turned Macedonia into another Roman province. So Rome's military conquest then led directly to Rome being a cultural center also, and it allowed for cultural growth. The Romans had benefited a whole lot from contact with other nations, other cultures, especially the Greeks. And the first Roman literature begins to appear around this time of 240 BC, when they began translating some of the Greek classics into Latin. Eventually, Rome is going to adopt a whole lot of Greek art and philosophy and religion, so that they even say that there is no difference between Greek and Roman religion. It's just they change the names of the gods. The king of the gods in Greece is Zeus. In Rome, it's Jupiter. In Greece, Hera is the queen of the king of the gods, and in Rome, it's Juno. The only one who keeps the same name is Apollo. Both Greece and Rome keep Apollo. Athena becomes Minerva. Is that right? Athena becomes, yeah, Minerva. No, Diana. That's right. And Mars in Rome is Ares in Greece. The forge, or the smith of the gods is Hephaestus in Greece. He's Vulcan and so they of course believed that Vulcan had his smith shop in volcanoes, which is where, in fact, we even get the word volcano. Comes from the Latin Vulcan. And also, those who study volcanoes are called volcanologists. We get about 67% of our vocabulary from Latin. And so you'll see a whole lot of these things will carry over into our culture that sometimes the Romans had gotten from Greece, sometimes they had created themselves. Now, inside the late period of the Roman Republic is their complex political institutions started to groan under the weight of this growing empire, and it brought in an era of internal turmoil and violence, and the gap between the rich and the poor began to widen steadily as wealthy landowners were driving small farmers off the land, and while access to government became once again increasingly limited to the more privileged classes. They tried to address these social problems with especially two brothers. They were known as Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Collectively, they were called the Gracchi. They instituted reform movements like in 133 BC, and then they tried again in 123 and 122 BC. And finally, the Gracchi, the two brothers, wound up being put to death at the hands of the wealthy, who didn't want these reforms in favor of the poor. Along comes a guy shortly after the death of the Gracchi. His name was Gaius Marius. Marius is what he's mostly known in history, just by that name. He was a commoner, but his military power had kind of elevated him to the position of consul. In fact, he was consul for 6 full terms, beginning in 107 BC. And he was the first of a series of, I'm going to say, warlords who kind of dominated the Roman Republic during this late period of the Republic. By 91 BC, Marius was struggling against attacks from his opponents, including a fellow general named Sulla. Sulla had eventually emerged as a military dictator, had Marius overthrown, and Sulla then institutes really what can only be called a military dictatorship. His name was ruined in Roman history when later on someone would say, well, Sulla did it. And someone mentioned that to Crassus, Marcus Licinius Crassus, one time. And his response was, Sulla, to the everlasting infamy of his name. That was how they felt about this military dictatorship. Well, after Sulla retired, and he actually retired, he wasn't booted out like Marius was. And even to this day, some historians of Rome will have a favorable view of Marius and some more favorable of Sulla. And it's kind of like the argument between Plato and Aristotle. It just depends on your orientation, I'll say. After Sulla retires, one of his former supporters, another Roman general, but a rich guy and from the upper class, named Pompey, Marcus Cnaeus Pompeius. Pompey, he served briefly as a consul before waging this pretty successful military campaigns against the pirates in the Mediterranean. Piracy had just dominated the Mediterranean, and unless you're in a naval flotilla, you're going to be captured or at least robbed by these pirates. During this time, there was a young guy who had been elected to or more or less appointed to the office of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the Roman religion. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar wound up traveling, this is before he had been elected actually, wound up traveling and was captured by pirates. So the pirates were they found out he was from a noble family, and they were going to hold him for ransom. They asked for something like, I don't remember the exact number, something like 10,000 sesterces, and Caesar goes, "Are you out of your mind? I'm worth 5 times that." Well, these pirates, waiting for payment, had gotten to know him. They kept him on an island somewhere in the Aegean Sea, and he kept saying, "No, no, no, they'll pay for me." Well, these guys loved him. Well, as the money arrived and the ship to come and take Caesar away, Caesar turns and says to these pirates, "You know I'm going to come back and crucify all of you, don't you?" They all laughed and slapped him on the back and sent him on his way. Caesar got back, mobilized a few ships with a few troops, and came back and crucified the bunch of them. Later on, Caesar would be known for his mercy and for his clemency offered to political opponents, but at this point, it became clear that he was going to have to establish a reputation for himself. This was the one thing to gain a reputation. The Romans appreciated ruthlessness, but they also appreciated keeping your word. So Caesar did 2 things at the same time. Now, so back over to Pompey. Here he has cleared the Mediterranean of piracy, or at least to a large degree. And he's also defeated the forces of Mithridates in Asia Minor, Turkey, we call it today. 5 Mithridatic wars were fought until eventually they will gain control of Asia Minor, Turkey. During the same time period, Marcus Tullius Cicero, you may have heard his name before, he was elected a consul in 63 BC, and he had famously defeated this conspiracy of a patrician group known as the Catiline, and he won a reputation as one of Rome's great orators, speech makers, wrote fantastic books. They become the textbook in every fourth year Latin class in high school, I think. The speeches of Cicero, and also here he was against the patrician Catiline conspirators who wanted to finally end all plebeian enfranchisement. But no, he winds up eventually taking the side of Pompey and some others, even against Caesar. But in the meantime, with victorious Pompey returning to Rome, he then formed an uneasy alliance known as the First Triumvirate. Triumvirate, 3, vir, V-I-R, meant like a man. Yeah, it's really not even human. It's specifically a man. And this First Triumvirate then is formed with, there's your picture, Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus had become famous when he put down a certain gladiator revolt that starred Kirk Douglas. The movie Spartacus is famous for that. And at the end of Spartacus, when Spartacus and his rebel gladiators are crucified along the Appian Way, Crassus tells Caesar, you know, I think I fear Spartacus dead more than I fear him alive. He said, almost as much as I fear you, my dear Caesar, because Crassus already saw that Caesar was gaining great popularity among the knights class, which is kind of a middle class, the equites, they were called, and among the what I'll say, the plebeians. So these guys, and they're said pretty well, the first triumvirate was an extra legal alliance, meaning the three of them were not elected as triumvirs. They formed an alliance amongst themselves and created this triumvirate. Pompey and Crassus had been consuls together in 70 BC, but they had a falling out later over questions of status and prestige among themselves. Caesar, who was younger and something of a protege of Crassus, brought the two of them back together. That was one of Caesar's great talents, was as a mediator and a diplomat. As much as a great general as he was, as much as a great statesman as he was, that ability to bring people together was something pretty extraordinary about him, and really something kind of remarkable for the time. Each of them brought something to the table. Caesar led the populares, the common folks. Pompey led the optimati, the very high class, and Crassus was the richest man in Rome. He led the merchant class, the middle class, the equites. Caesar sealed the deal by giving his daughter Julia in marriage to Pompey. Well, that's fine for a little while. But Pompey's wife, Julia, dies. And she dies in the year 54. And Crassus is way off in Parthia, which is what today we would call Iran, way off battling against the Parthians, and dies in battle. So now, with Julia dying, with Crassus dead, now it's just Pompey and Caesar. When there's three, you know, that phrase about a three-cord rope cannot soon be broken, or something like that. When three becomes two, then it's face to face. And it won't be able to stay as a partnership. It's like the Muslims say. A Muslim friend of mine said, if partners were a good idea, Allah would have had one. Well, it's certainly that way among the Roman leaders. With this old style politics now in complete disorder, Pompey stepped in as the sole consul in the year 53. If we look at image 5, Pastor, Caesar then begins to gain great glory in Gaul, in France, and begins increasing his wealth there. The most famous battle that Caesar fought in Gaul was he was trying to capture the Gallic king known as Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was this very charismatic, brilliant commander, and he had holed up in the city, which is on top of this hill, the city called Alesia. He has, it depends on who you read, but most people think that he has something like 40,000 troops inside there. Caesar surrounds him, and if Caesar was great at anything, it was engineering. And he establishes this interior wall, it's section B that you see there. Those are the fortifications that are facing inward to keep Vercingetorix and his army from breaking out. Now, what Caesar has done is you'll see that there's no water getting in there. There's a stream that runs at the foot of the hill, but Vercingetorix and the population of the city can't get to it. There's no food coming into it, so Caesar is ready to starve them out. However, he finds out that there is a relieving force coming of the Gauls who are going to come and try to break the siege. Caesar then builds a second wall, an exterior facing wall, C, if you'll see there at the bottom. And so now the fortifications are all facing out. There are sharpened stakes, actually, that have been driven into the ground, and also a series of trenches that have been filled with water from this diverted stream that you see there. So any Gallic force that's trying to attack in is going to have to cross through these muddy, water-filled moats, and then might impale themselves on these stakes that are formed out, not to mention the archer towers that you see raised up there along those walls. But he also created a boardwalk, basically, that was more or less flat. So instead of having to run up and down hills, they would establish themselves on these interior lines, and they could move just in case they were all on one side and the Gauls attacked on the other. They could reinforce any point on this expanding and contracting donut to reach it without having to run up and down hills and through streams and across moats. It was basically a plumb level boardwalk. So when the relieving force tries to come, the Gauls are going to try to break out at the same time. How they got messages to each other is still a mystery. Still, so the outside force starts to break in from one side, the inside force tries to break out from the other side, but because of the archer towers, because of the defenses, and if we'll go to the very next one, image 6, Pastor, this is what they were having to run through. You see that there was 2 concentric trenches that were there, along with the stakes that would be at the bottom of the wall, and some of the stakes were actually driven into the earthwork just at the base of the fence there, or the wall. So they got to run through the first moat, climb up the second, go down into the third or second moat and the interior moat, and all this while they are being just absolutely shredded with Roman archers. It was brilliant. So Rome now, specifically Julius Caesar, ends the Gallic conflict, makes Gaul a Roman province, and he brings Vercingetorix back to Rome in chains. So when he comes back now, his military victory being secured, his wealth certainly being secured by all that he had acquired there in Gaul, he now eclipses Pompey. And Pompey, teamed up with his Senate allies, decide to undermine Caesar. In 49 BC, Caesar and one of his legions, coming from Gaul, coming from France, Caesar decides to cross this river with his armies. This river was supposed to be the border where Roman generals would not bring their own troops. In Italy, in the region controlled by the Senate, it was just always believed that generals kept their armies outside of there, that it was only senatorial armies who would keep the peace inside. Nevertheless, Caesar crosses this river called the Rubicon. And when he's ready to cross and his first troops start stepping into the water, he issues or declares the famous phrase, "The die is cast," meaning there's no turning back now. It's civil war. It's going to be Caesar against Pompey. So he crosses from Cisalpine Gaul into Italy, and now this is known as Caesar's invasion of Italy. It ignited a civil war, and when it was over with, and boy, oh boy, did he make an end to it, Caesar will come out as appointed as the first consul. He will later be appointed dictator for life, even in the year 45. Now, he's got Pompey, who has been leading this this civil war on the other side, but he also has certain friends like Cicero, the guy we talked about, and a guy named Marcus Junius Brutus, another guy named Gaius Cassius. And so Caesar says, look, all's forgiven, come back home. You guys are brilliant legislators, you're brilliant in making law, come back home. Cicero wouldn't believe it, and Cicero took his own life. Brutus and Cassius took him up on it. Everybody was kind of surprised at the generosity and the forgiveness of Caesar. But Caesar knew that these were people of talent, and here's the one naive moment Caesar has, is he believes that forgiveness begets forgiveness. That's not always true, sadly. So Pompey actually winds up being escaping down into Egypt, and the king of Egypt down there, a guy named Ptolemy, if you remember that name, he was one of the generals of Alexander, who took over the kingdom of Egypt. Now his 15th descendant, Ptolemy the 16th, is in control there. They figured they can make friends with Caesar by executing Pompey. Caesar knows that Pompey has gone down into Egypt, and so he follows down there, and they present Caesar with the head of Pompey, and Caesar was furious. He said, only a Roman may kill a Roman. And actually, Caesar was probably going to offer him amnesty. Forgive everything, let him come back. After all, they had been in-laws with each other. And no matter what, people think about political marriages, there was an attachment there. Still, Caesar decides, you know what? This is it for you guys. He finds out that Ptolemy the 16th has a sister who was supposed to co-rule with him, but he has sent her off into some kind of internal exile. I say internal meaning inside Egypt. And Caesar finds out about it, finds the young girl named Cleopatra, and decides to have Ptolemy killed and Cleopatra put in his place. Well, we all know about that story. We've seen the movie with Elizabeth Taylor. So eventually, the two of them, whether they fall in love or they just see a political advantage, who knows? But she was supposed to be pretty charming, not altogether beautiful as some might think, but charming. So now Caesar will wind up going back to Rome, and less than a year later, with him expanding to the territory of the Republic like it had never been before, with gaining peace with the people, the populares, the common folks, finding a new champion amongst them, he winds up being assassinated by the two guys he had forgiven, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius. And Brutus was considered to be one of Caesar's very best friend, if not his best. Still, when he is going into the Senate, his his partner and one of his generals was Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony. And the custom was they go into the Senate unarmed, but Antony always had a weapon stashed away somewhere, and so they knew, separate Mark Antony. Well, as they're approaching the forum where the Senate meets, Mark Antony is distracted by somebody who wants to ask him a particular question, and so Mark Antony is taken away, and Caesar continues on. He gets to the forum, and he's by himself. And the senators all drew daggers and stabbed Caesar. It depends. Some say as many as 55 times. Others say something like 37. Dying Caesar looks at his friend Brutus, and he utters the immortal words, "Et tu, Brute?" You too, Brutus? They had all turned on him. Why? Jealousy? Absolutely. Loss of control by the super wealthy? Yeah, definitely. It's always that way. Well, Caesar is murdered on the Ides of March. The Ides are always the 15th of the month. So on March 15th, 44 BC, Brutus and Cassius lead this revolt against Caesar, murder him in the forum, and then something pretty extraordinary happens. That is that his nephew, actually his great nephew, but one who had been adopted by Caesar, adopted as his heir, named Octavian, they were all saying that everything that Caesar did was illegal, and that everything that, all of his reforms, well, they got them to admit that Caesar was a legitimate ruler. The minute they said that, Octavian produces this will of Caesar, and Caesar's will says that all of Caesar's offices, all of his property, all of his wealth goes to Octavian. Holy smokes. So these guys now have just validated Caesar's political standing and his what do I want to say, his right to rule and his right to make laws. And now this will shows up, and all of his offices and property and wealth goes to his heir Octavian. Octavian joins with Mark Antony, and the two of them begin to crush the forces of Brutus and Cassius. They chased them all the way to well, first to Spain, then to Greece, I think, and then finally they have done away with all the conspirators. They go back home, and while Octavian does have a good bit of money, Antony doesn't, and so they join forces with a guy named Lepidus. And Lepidus was an ex-consul who was now the richest man in Rome. So Antony and Octavian decide to form the second triumvirate. Now, if we look at image 7, Pastor, with Octavian leading the western provinces, and Antony is in the eastern provinces, and Lepidus is in Africa. If you'll see the dark green, that's all Octavian's territory. The kind of a teal color, Macedonia, Asia, Palestine, Cyrenaica, yeah, all of that is now Antony, and Lepidus gets the small little chunk of Africa. Now, these guys there, they start having tensions develop between them around 36 BC, and pretty soon the triumvirate dissolved. Lepidus had been assassinated. By whom? History doesn't know, but history has some suspicions. Probably Octavian. Now, with the triumvirate dissolved again, Mark Antony goes down to Egypt and hooks up with Cleopatra. And yeah, same thing happens between him and her as happened between Caesar and her. And finally, the Cleopatra will give her support of her navy, the Egyptian navy, to Antony, and they will decide to go off and fight against Octavian. The final battle between them takes place in Actium. If you look at Macedonia there, and then go south where you see the crossed swords at Actium, yep, right there, is where that final battle will take place in 31 BC. Octavian triumphs over the forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra hears that Antony has been killed in battle, and she, puts her hand in the basket of figs that has a viper inside, an asp, and bites her. She dies. Antony comes back. He's not dead, but he finds her there and then commits suicide. By 29, because Octavian will head on to Egypt and solidify his power there, and then return home. By 29, Octavian is the sole leader of Rome and all the provinces. He decides he doesn't want to meet his uncle's fate, and he makes sure of his position as absolute ruler to the public by restoring the political institutions of the Roman Republic while really keeping power for himself. In the year 27 BC, he takes the title Augustus, becomes the first emperor of Rome. He takes 3 offices. The first one is he is Pontifex Maximus, high priest. So he is basically Pope. He takes the power of Roman religion, and it's now in him. His second office is called Princeps, which makes him the first citizen. That's what the word means. He's the first citizen or primary citizen, where we get the word prince, obviously. As princeps, he is the lawgiver. The third one is he is imperator, and that's really where we get the word emperor. And the imperator is the commander of the military. So he is, in modern terms, he would be Pope, Speaker of the House, and President. All three wrapped up in one person. Pretty impressive. And now we move in 27 BC from the Republic to the empire. It's during this setting that Christ will be born in Jerusalem, and the writings will begin to take place. In the age of the emperors now, if we look at image number 8, Pastor, the era of Augustus is, he restores a moral code after this is Augustus, probably the most famous statue of him. And it is, and look at the little one holding on to him there. There are some who have said that it is representing of, as a child of Mars. Others who have said that this actually was supposed to represent the Roman Empire, the Roman state, that the state was dependent on him like a child holding on to a parent's garment. Anyway, he institutes this restored moral code, and he winds up actually being moral. He was a great leader, no doubt. He actually created an office of censorship that certain poets like Ovid wind up being exiled from Rome because of his writing was supposed to be so immoral. He brought about social reforms. He won so many military victories and allowed Roman literature, art, architecture, and religion to all really begin to flourish. He ruled for 56 years, supported by this great army and by this growing cult of devotion to the emperor. The emperor cult grew very, very strong. It had its beginnings with Augustus, but it will continue to grow even after. In image 9, Pastor, we look at when he died. The Senate had basically elevated him to the status of a god. But look at what he inherited. When we look at the light green there, that sage color, that's the empire when Augustus dies. He has expanded. He's taken Syria and Judea and most of Asia Minor, all of North Africa, almost all of North Africa except for Mauritania, all of Spain, and the empire is huge. It will grow, definitely, from there. But over here, the yellow, you see, the yellow and the orange is the Parthians. These guys will be a pain in the neck to the Romans forever. Crassus, like I said, dies fighting against these guys, and they will always be a threat. They were, you'll see why I'm mentioning this in a second. They were known for their horse cavalry, but especially their horse archers. They were terrifying to the Roman populations. And for those who were living in Asia Minor, the Parthians were just way too close for comfort. But the image of the horseman with a bow will carry over to a certain chapter in Revelation, where it talks about the 4 horsemen, and that image of the rider on the white horse with a bow is representing conquest. Now, you can interpret Revelation however you want to, and that's fine. But historically, this is who the citizens of Rome were thinking about. When Revelation is being written, the Parthians are threatening at the borders during this time. And this war is ongoing between Rome and the Parthians. And so what they saw was here's what happens with conquest, and conquest represented by the Parthians. After it comes war, the red horse. After that comes famine, because war and invasions will always result in famine. And then finally, there is death, death and the grave. When it says in Revelation, and he that sat upon that horse was death, and hell followed after him, a lot of times, well, we've just really misread that part, because what it's talking about is not hell as in the sense of the afterlife and punishment, but what it's actually saying is that here on this is death, and Hades follows after. And Hades is actually the Greek god of the underworld, the god of the dead, so to speak. And so what the writer was saying was that death is the last stage of conquest, and the god of death follows in his trail. Pretty descriptive stuff. Still, people can make out of it what they choose, but a sense of it being that, a place of torment follows after is not really what the author was trying to say. Now, so here is, when he dies, there's the Senate actually elevates him to the status of a god. And that established a long-running tradition of deifying, especially popular emperors. Augustus dynasty included, who followed after him was, again, his adopted nephew, Tiberius, who was pretty, not a horrible emperor, but still just unpopular. It's during the reign of Tiberius that Jesus will be crucified. And when what's his name? Pontius Pilate, when Pilate mishandles it, Tiberius recalls him from Palestine. Judea was the Roman province, recalls him from Judea because, and the official order was for mishandling the Galilean question. Wow. So Tiberius will actually recall Pontius Pilate and force him into retirement. And where does Pontius Pilate end his days? In Pompeii, not to be confused with the guy Pompey, but in the city of Pompeii that will eventually be erupted upon by Mount Vesuvius. Now, after Tiberius comes the bloodthirsty and quite crazy Caligula. Sorry, crazy is not an official psychological term. I'll call him unstable. The unstable Caligula, who will rule for 4 years from 37 to 41, and he will actually wind up being assassinated by his own guard, the Praetorian Guard, who were the household guards of the Caesars. He is going to be replaced by his uncle Claudius. When the Praetorian Guard killed Caligula, they wanted somebody they thought they could control. Oh, sorry. Image 10 there, Pastor, is the bust of Caligula there. And it was, a bit of a bratty kid. His father was a guy named Gaius Germanicus, who was this great general and should have succeeded to the throne. But yeah, the noble Germanicus wound up dying mysteriously, and some people thought that Caligula had killed his father. Germanicus would have been one of the great emperors. He was a noble person. But anyway, here now we have Caligula. His name was actually Gaius Drusus Germanicus Caligula. Caligula was the name that had been given to him by his soldiers, or actually the soldiers of his fathers. And Caligula is a Latin phrase that means little boots. because they had made soldiers' boots for him and all like that. So he walked around in armor like his father had for him, and he always wanted to rule everything. So the soldiers called him Little Boots. They thought it was cute. It would have probably resulted in swift execution if they called him that to his face. He was known, he called himself the Emperor Gaius. So now with after him comes Claudius, and during the time of Claudius, and Claudius is the one that the Praetorian Guard came to find, and they wanted somebody they can control, and Claudius had always maintained this very careful image of being an idiot, his words. And he stammered, and whether or not he stammered for real or simply as to put on this front of being less than, in fact, he always said that Caligula called him Uncle Claudius. And so here he is he just wants to be left alone, wants to write. He wrote a magnificent history of the Roman Republic. He just wants to be left alone. Now the Praetorians find him cowering in a closet, and he thinks they're going to kill him, when instead he looks up and they all salute and say, "Hail Caesar." Well, all right. During his reign is when the Jews and the Christians in Rome will begin struggling with each other. And so he will exile all of them in the year 50. It's called the Edict of Expulsion. And so he sends all these different Christians and Jews away from the city of Rome. During that time, Peter will leave Rome and go all the way, not only into France, but into Britain. And all of them will scatter. They will be able to come back just a few years later. When Claudius is married and winds up divorcing her and marries a woman named Messalina, and she wants him to adopt her son as the new heir. Let me see image 11, Pastor, please. Yeah. Here's the next guy. When there was enough movies to portray him kind of like this to make him understand. His wife, Messalina, wants her son to be adopted, this kid. And Caesar, Claudius, finally says, well, all right, I don't have any children. I'll make him my heir. Well, everybody knew that Claudius was very fond of mushrooms stewed in wine sauce. And so at the banquets, everybody would always just let him eat all of the mushrooms, the stewed mushrooms. So he, at a banquet, they pass over the mushrooms to him, and he takes a bite of one and eats a second one. And then a look comes over his face, and he looks at Messalina and he says, "Have I eaten death?" "Well, no, my lord," she says. Yep, sure enough. That night, Claudius passes away, and her son, this brat, Nero, becomes the next emperor. Well, Nero, he thinks he's an artist. He thinks he's a great statesman. He thinks he's a poet. He thinks he's a musician. He thinks that he is just it. So during his time now is when we will see the first systematic persecution of Christians. It's during his reign that we will see the death of Simon Peter, the death of Paul. All of that takes place during his time. I'm going to move ahead a little bit also, because the line of Augustus now ends with Nero. He dies in 68 because he hears that there is a Roman general on his way from Gaul, General Galba, who is coming to take the throne from him. Nero decides to take his own life. Now, Nero is the guy who burned Rome, remember? Blamed it on the Christians. And as he's ready to commit suicide, he weeps for Rome, and he actually takes a vial and puts the tears in this vial, puts a stopper in it, and he says that, you know, the tears of a god should be kept forever. Goodness gracious. Well, Galba is on his way, and Nero commits suicide. This year, 68 to 69, this 12-month period will be known as the year of three emperors, because the first one, Galba, comes, Nero's already dead, and he takes control. But at the same time, an army from Spain under General Otho was on the way. And Otho comes and overthrows Galba, who had overthrown Nero. Shortly thereafter, General Vitellius comes from Asia Minor, I think, and he overthrows Galba. So you have Galba, Otho, Vitellius, who all come in the year spanning 68, 69, that 12-month period. Vitellius was not quite the crazy that Nero was, but he had his own appetites, and I say appetites because, I'm not kidding, he almost bankrupted the Roman treasury by his feasts, by his eating binges. That's where he was concerned, was so he didn't really hurt any Christians or anything, because he was, you know, more interested in a third helping of pasta primavera, I guess. Anyway, so now that the draining of the Roman treasury, the downfall, Nero's suicide, the three emperors afterwards, finally a fourth emperor shows up in the year 69, General Vespasian. And his successors will be Titus and Domitian. They're known as the Flavian emperors. They tried to temper the excesses of the Roman court. They tried to restore the Senate's authority. They tried to promote public welfare. Titus is the guy who was the general who was in charge of the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70. In that year, the year 70, he will not only destroy the city of Jerusalem, sack the temple, and if we'll look at image 11a, Pastor, he will also then, what I'll say, gain the people's trust, because he winds up restoring the authority of the Senate so well. He makes all kinds of recovery efforts. He tries to save the cities during the eruption of Vesuvius. But here, this is Masada. The zealots of Jerusalem were going to defend themselves, and they went to this high plateau where a palace of Herod had been built. In fact, you could see a little bit, the white spots over here on the, there you go. That was actually the resort palace for Herod. They had amazing water supply systems up there. Well, General Titus gets there, sees all these guys holed up in on Masada, and he's not going to turn around. What he starts to do is to build a ramp. The Romans were nothing if not great engineers. And so you see that road on the right-hand side that leads up. That ramp was actually 2 miles long. And so they just built this incline so that they could walk right up. The story goes, according to Josephus, that all the defenders of Masada killed themselves instead of falling into the hands of the Romans. Archaeological evidence shows that there were some who did escape. There were certain ways to get out. Nonetheless, that was the final conquest of Jerusalem for Titus. If we look at B, image B, go to the right to the next one, Pastor, then this is what the siege of Jerusalem looked like. Kind of like Alesia. He wound up surrounding the city so that there is no way to get reinforced by any fresh water except for the few wells that were there in the city. But food can't come in, and eventually they just began to crack the outside walls, and from the main Roman camp. And you'll see on the far right-hand side, the 10th Legion. The 10th Legion was the crack legion of the Roman Empire. They were the ones who had been assembled and honed by Julius Caesar himself, and the 10th always represented the greatest fighters of the bunch. Look at the next one, the very next one, Pastor, 11C, I think I called it. Yeah, this is the Arch of Titus, where if you'll look, let me see. It's on the far right-hand side. Anyway, that relief sculpture there actually shows them pillaging the city of Jerusalem, and then it kind of wraps around to the other side where you actually see soldiers carrying out the giant menorah. And so that represented one of Titus's great victories. Rome only destroyed 2 cities in their entire history. The first was Carthage, the second was Jerusalem. Following Titus, who will rule from really only 3 years, from 79 to 81, will come General Domitian. Now, Domitian is one of the weird characters ever. He actually issues an edict that says that he is to be referred to as Deus et Dominus Noster, Latin for our Lord and God. Now, that's a very specific phrase, and it's one that will appear in the Gospel according to John, that was written probably just after this event. In John 20:28, you'll see Jesus referred to as my Lord and my God. That was something specific. That's not a coincidence. John meant that. That for all that the Caesars had done, for all the glory that they achieved, they are not Lord and God. Only Christ could claim that title. But it was a title bestowed on him. He didn't call himself that. His disciples did. In fact, I think it's Thomas who refers to him that in John 20. So much went on during the reign of Domitian, and we'll talk about that more in our upcoming classes. But after him comes the reign of Nerva, who was selected by the Senate to succeed Domitian, and he kind of began another golden age in Roman history. Bless you. And during this golden age, there will be Trajan and Hadrian, the guy who built the wall, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. They took the throne peacefully, succeeding one another by adoption, as opposed to a real, true hereditary succession. And then finally, Trajan. If you look at image 12, Pastor. Trajan is the guy who will take the empire to its greatest expansion. All that red there is Trajan. He had gone up into the Caucasus between, well, it's called Pontus Euxinus, which is actually the Black Sea, and Mare Ircano, which is actually the Caspian Sea, up into there, all the way up to the border between what we would call England and Scotland. They called it Britannia and Caledonia. Got all of Egypt, all of North Africa, but still, to the east, there's still the Parthians, who will always remain a threat. He takes the borders to their greatest extent with victories over just everybody, except the Parthians. But when you think about Rome, and if you'll go to just kind of click through the next ones, Pastor, the next images, this is the forum where the Senate met. The forum right there was on the floors in front of it was kind of a marketplace, but it was also a place where heralds would, or kind of like what we would call town criers, would stand there and shout out the news of the day. But then inside is where the Roman Senate would meet. And the next one is something that most of us know about, the Roman Colosseum. Doesn't look like that now. Thanks to emissions from cars and stuff like that, it is still undergoing collapse. But this is what it would have looked like even back then. The Roman Colosseum could seat 70,000 people. and it could be filled or emptied in 5 minutes. That's pretty remarkable. Now, it's not only this that we know about, but we have discovered only in the last few decades, if we'll look at the next one, Pastor, that it actually had awnings too, so that the people got to sit in the shade. There was awnings that ran all the way around it, so that the warriors would fight, in the sun on the sand. And the reason they had sand there was so that you wouldn't step in the slick blood. Yep, kind of gory. The next one, Rome is also famous for, this is still the Colosseum. This is what the Colosseum looks like now. And if you look at the bottom where the underneath, that was where they kept cages, where they kept the wild animals. That was where there was also water pipes that ran through there, because they could flood the Colosseum and conduct naval battles in there. They would recreate the Battle of Actium, or the battle, or whichever, recreate Pompey, sweeping out the pirates, all that stuff. So not only do you have the sand there where you could have battles taking place, but you also have naval battles under there, as well as the cages for the animals that would be released that would, turn on either gladiators or Christians. Next one then is, there's one of the naval battles. And the people would flood that, and that middle part there that was kind of a dock was could be built up and removed in preparation for, it wasn't normally there when they were doing the gladiator stuff, but if they were having a naval battle, they would actually build that, and it would serve like to remind of a dock or a harbor or something like that. The next image then is the aqueduct. The most remarkable engineering feat. Colosseum's pretty remarkable, but for places like the city of Rome, the river Tiber had gotten to be so polluted that they needed fresh water to come out of the Po Mountains, the Italian Alps, it's sometimes called. And so they would do this by these copper pipes that would be, as it comes from the hills, it would open up into these open cisterns, and then it gets farther down and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, which of course creates water pressure, which would then push it up the next hill. It gets to the next hill, and then it opens back again and repeats the same thing over and over again. So this hydraulic pressure that they created, and we're talking about around the year 1 AD where they're doing this, was bringing fresh water to all the major cities of the Roman Empire. Pretty impressive. Next one, Pastor, is Circus Maximus. That was where where Ben-Hur raced his chariot, and it was they had the chariots with the 4 horses carrying each chariot, and they would have these races around there. Sometimes they would have just horseback races. Sometimes it was smaller ones. Anyway, this was your modern horse track. Another engineering model. All of this in downtown Rome. Within walking distance, you could go from the Colosseum to the arena, to the Circus Maximus here, to the Temple of Augustus, to the palaces. Is that the last one? I think that was the last one I had on there, right? Or is there one more? Oh, sure. Here was the palace of Tiberius on the island of Capri. Pretty remarkable stuff. He decided that he was afraid of assassination, so he built this palace for himself and governed from the island of Capri. Yeah. Nice work if you can get it. Anyway, so this is what Rome looks like. Now, Rome is it's the only influence on the New Testament, I can say. It was sure the Greeks had their own influences through literature and philosophy, no doubt about it. But it was Rome who is going to have the most say as to how the Gospels are written, what informs the Gospels and the letters of Paul and all of the New Testament documents. That you'll see various things as we go along that will make you go, oh, Rome. Here's an example. When in the book of Mark, which is the first of the Gospels to be written, we see that Jesus is being baptized and a dove descends, right? And through that dove descending, which Mark says was the Spirit descending on Jesus, that through that, that was kind of reminding everybody of, here's how Augustus was chosen as Caesar. That Julius Caesar, when trying to decide who to adopt, actually saw a dove descend on Augustus, Octavian at the time, and that's how Augustus, or how Julius Caesar knew that Octavian was the one. Octavian was the one appointed by God, and so he chose him. So when Mark writes that, and remember, Mark was writing to a Roman audience, everybody reads that and goes, oh yeah, we know that story. That will happen over and over again. Do you think it's any, I know that we want to look at it as being a doctrine that was always in place, but we've talked a lot about the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. But in the Gospels itself, or in the writings of the New Testament itself, you don't see really any mention of any kind of a Trinity. And yet, what develops is a Trinity because the Romans liked that. In this case, I think that politics and history kind of informed religion, influenced religion. And so, whereas Rome had a first triumvirate, the great one, and a second triumvirate, it almost looks like in Christianity, a divine triumvirate emerges. Well, we could talk about that for a good long time and probably come to blows over it, but we won't do that. We'll leave it there where it is. So next week, we're going to talk about the first writings of the New Testament and where all that fits in Roman history here, where that fits as far as what's going on with other nations, but for really all that matters for the New Testament, whereas the Old Testament was concerned with the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Assyrians and all the rest of them. The New Testament is really concerned only with the Roman Empire. So there we have it. And we'll call it quits there. I didn't go quite so bad this time, but anyway.
A couple of questions that came up for me, Travis, and I'm still recording this because I'd like your responses. Reminder, and I'll ask them and you can decide what order to write to answer them in. But so Octavian Augustus took over Palestine area just as Jesus was born, which maybe ties into Rome just conquered here, so there's a census that happened. I mean, that story, right?
Actually,
or that, or who was in charge of the Palestinian area? Was it the Parthians?
It was the Romans, no doubt, but it was actually Pompey who had expanded into and created the Judean province. It was called Tertia Palestina, I think, by the Romans at the time. And so it was created then as a province during the time of Pompey and Julius Caesar. Now, when Augustus Caesar becomes emperor, he starts wanting to create a census to find out. I mean, in the King James Version, it says all the world should be taxed. We know that's not exactly right, that there was a census to be taken. So everybody was supposed to go to their homeland where their families had been and to, file for the census there. So it was during the time of Augustus. I mean, the gospel got that exactly right. It's when Quirinius was governor of, all that. But yeah, so it had already been a Roman province for probably 45 or 50 years by that time. But Augustus is the first to do a census of the area.
Yeah. Okay. So then my next question, I'm keeping you on camera for this because I want your reaction. You talked about Vulcans and that we got volcanoes from that. Or sorry, I let it Vulcan. You got volcanoes. But the Star Trek connection, like why Vulcans?
Oh, because remember, you've got cousins, right? You've got the Romulans.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm such a dork that I even know this.
Yeah.
You've got the Romulans, who are obviously descended from the Romes. All their officers are prefects and tribunes and all that stuff, but their cousins are the Vulcans. So basically, what do I say? The world of Vulcan is volcanoes. It's hot. It's all like that. So this is where the forge of the god Vulcan would have been. So yeah, it shows their connection as cousins by way of Roman mythology. But yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
Excellent. Thank you.
Certainly.
All right. Any other questions? I can stop the recording too, but